Good morning. Give me just a second. We just set up this new cool space so I could do my Zooms and look super professional, but then somebody messed with it and it didn't work. So I'm just getting back here. So give me just a second to set it all up and then we'll start. Okay, you should be able to see my slideshow. Can everybody see it? Okay, I'm so excited to teach this class today. It's one of my favorite ones to teach. I feel like it's kind of a fun, interesting class. Lots of good questions usually come out of it about lending. And if you've been an agent very long, you probably understand a little bit about lending, but it's usually a little bit less logical than I would like sometimes. And so there's always really good questions. I feel like it's um, a fun thing to go over with agents so we can kind of all be on the same page. First of all, though, let's talk a little bit about what's going on today. I had somebody call me today and say, are you teaching your class? Everything's going crazy. I'm scared to turn on my computer. If you've been following CNN, you know that there's some outages right now with big IT companies. So like our lending program that we use and that a lot of companies use is down right now all across the nation. So I'm glad I don't have a CD that I need to get out today because that would be hard. Okay, so remember for classes, if you've attended my classes before, remember that you need to keep track of the keywords that I give out. I'm going to be giving out 5 keywords today. You'll need to at least send 4 of them back to me. So you can scan this QR code. I'll give it out again, and kind of put them in as you go into the Google Doc, or you can email them to me. It's not, if you can use the Google Doc, it makes it easier for us when we're banking. But just make sure you keep track of those words. Every once in a while, I'll have a class, and at the end, they say, I didn't know I was supposed to keep track of the words. So make sure when I give a keyword that you keep track of them somehow. And then at the end, you can send that to me. So just a few updates. Usually before I start a class, I like to go over interest rates a little bit, what's going on. There's a new thing with the 20,000 assistance for Utah housing. I don't know if you guys know, but originally when this came out, the only way you could pay, you had to pay it back when you refinanced or when you sold, right? So when people were getting these loans, I was telling people start saving now because when interest rates go down, you're going to need to you're going to want to refinance and you have no equity in the home. And so, but they've just changed it so that you can subordinate that second mortgage. So that's super good news, meaning that when rates go down, people are going to be able to refinance those loans, and that'll be nice for them. Interest rates are a little crazy. They went up just slightly today because of all this mess, and there's some bond issues, but they've been holding steady for the last little while, and I don't think we'll see any movement until the next Fed meeting. Does anybody know when that is? Does anybody follow that kind of stuff? So the end of this month, we'll have another Fed meeting, and everybody right now is pricing in a couple different rate cuts by the Feds this year. We're hoping for 2, the first one being hopefully in September. So those are the kind of the rate things. If you have any questions about rates, let me know. Okay, let's talk about loans. I'm gonna kind of be watching the chat as much as I can. Erin is my monitor today, and she'll kind of be watching. If you have a camera, please turn it on. That's one of the rules about Zoom classes. It looks like we've got some people towards the end that don't have their cameras on, but if you do have a camera, please turn it on. That's one of the rules. Throw on some pants and turn on your camera. And then the keywords, those are the things to monitor. And I really appreciate that the states continue to let us do Zoom classes. I feel like it saves a lot of time. Okay, the link is in the chat too. So if you want to go to the chat and just click on the link, that's okay if you don't have a camera, but if you do, please turn it on. You could click on the link and then you can fill out that Zoom, or sorry, that Google Doc on the link too, if your camera's not being able to download it. Okay, so let's go over the different loan programs. Most of you know the basic loan programs that we offer. Besides the non-QM, we won't really talk about non-QM loans like bank statement loans and things like that today. But basically we have, and I don't know if some of you work with me, you've seen my matrix that talks about all the different things. So we're kind of just going to go over that, basics, down payments, things like that for each of the different programs. Because ideally you as agents, you're not loan officers, right? You don't have to know everything about loans, but you want to know the basics so that when you're talking to your clients and they're asking things, you know what they're asking. And today I had somebody call me and say, somebody was asking me about 1031ing their primary residence, and I'm pretty sure you can't do that. Well, you can't, right? And so you want to know some of those things to say that's not possible. We're not going to be able to 1031, and you know that and be confident about that. Okay, so conventional loans, that's typically the one that you are going to want to see on your pre-approvals as sellers agents for sure, right? That's the one that everybody talks about that they want to see. We have FHA, we have VA, we have USDA. Has anybody done a USDA deal lately? I haven't. I can't find anybody that has. If you make enough money to have your DTIs low enough, then you don't qualify for USDA. So I haven't seen those right now, but I always look at those if somebody's buying in a rural area. And then we have Utah Housing. Utah Housing has 3 different programs. First Home, FHA, VA, it used to be Home Again, and Freddie Mac Advantage. So you can actually put 3% down and do a conventional loan through Utah Housing, which that's kind of a cool thing too. I'm not sure, Jackie, I don't know how you turn on your camera. If you just make sure you participate. If you can't turn on your camera, I'm not super tech savvy. So I'm glad I have my camera on. How about that? Okay, so let's go into these different loan programs a little bit and talk about those. First of all, let's go back. Does anybody know what are the down payment amounts for conventional? Unmute somebody who's brave and tell us what are the different options for a conventional loan that you can do if you're getting a loan. How much are your down payments? A lot of people, I have to have 20% down to buy a house. I'm saving. Okay. We have in the chat 5%. That is one of them. What else can you deal with?
I've seen 0% lately.
Okay, so there are some grants and things with conventional that are 0%. The only one that I offer is Utah Housing with FHA, okay, or with Freddie Mac. So I don't typically talk about 0% with conventional, but I know there's a few things out there that make that. So 5%. When can you put 3% down for conventional? I know it's a Friday morning. When can you put 3% down for conventional? Anybody know? Carlo, first-time home buyer. Okay, and what makes a first-time home buyer? If you haven't bought a home in the bought or owned, right? If you're on title, that if you put yourself on title, then you're not going to be a first-time home buyer. But if you haven't bought or owned a home in the last how many years?
I've always thought it was forever. Like that's the whole point of first time, but I don't really know.
Yeah, no, that's a good comment, right? So every 3 years. So if you sell a house and you haven't owned one or been on title for 3 years, you become a first-time home buyer again for purposes of loans. So thanks, Sherry. Okay, so if you are a first-time home buyer, 3% down, and if you're under 80% of the area median income, then there are some helps with rates and with mortgage insurance on those loans. And so for people who are, and right now it's hard, right? If you're under 80% of the area median income, it's hard to find something out there. But I'm still doing some of those loans. They're called Home Ready and Home Possible, and they're super awesome because they give these first-time home buyers a little bit of a rate cut and a little bit of a mortgage insurance cut when they're going 3% down. Okay, so let's talk about these other ones. I won't make you answer all the questions because part of the reason why you're here is for me to teach, right? So conventional, 3% down, we talked about, you have to be a first-time home buyer. 5% down is more typical. If you've owned a home before and you're buying a new primer, you're gonna have to put at least 5% down. Yeah, so that's a good question. Latifa, I hope I'm saying that right, is asking if a loan is not in your name, but you're on title on another home, does that apply? Yes, so you aren't a first-time home buyer if you've been on title on a home, because then you've owned a home in the last 3 years. Good question. Okay, so conventional, another thing that we used to talk about with conventional was, you know, if you were gonna buy a 3 to 4 unit home, because residential properties, we only go up to 4 units, but if you were gonna buy a 3 to 4 unit home, you used to have to put down 25%, even if it was gonna be owner occupied. But now you can put down 5%. So that's another cool thing that's recently changed. You can owner occupy a duplex, a triplex, or a fourplex and only have to put 5% down. Okay. Conventional is investment property, right? So we have that there. You have to put 25% down. There are 20% down options, and we used to talk about those. Right now, we're not talking about those very much because it's so expensive to get a rate on 20% down. And so we're not really pricing those. There also has always been a 15% down investment option, but that's not pricing either right now. So we're really just talking about investments at 25%, unless you want to move into it as a primary and use it as investment, live in it for a year and then move out, right? Then you'll be able to get that primary rate and put less money down. People talk about investment properties with FHA because, as you see here, FHA requires a 3.5% down, and they have a lower rate. And so, you know, it's very appealing to people to get a lower rate right now with these FHA properties. When you're talking about people buying an investment property, moving into it as a primary, 3 or 4 units, you can do that FHA, but the problem right now is that it has to cash flow. So all the units have to cash flow and make the payment on FHA, and that's hard right now. So just be aware of that if you're talking to people about, well, you could just put 3.5% down and buy a 3 or 4 unit property. It has to cash flow, and so sometimes that doesn't work. Okay, we have second home, 10% down. What are the rules about second home? Does anybody know? There's one that we always hear and talk about. Has to be so many miles away to count as a second home. Can't be in the same town, Carlos said. Okay. That would be logical, right? So we're going to talk about that. Typically, you'll hear people say it has to be, okay, Corey says must occupy a minimum amount of time during the year. Good. Certain amount of days per year. Good. So one of the things I'll usually hear people say is, well, it has to be 100 miles away to count as a second home from your primary, right? And that's kind of like, that comes from an FHA rule that we have, right? But basically it has to make sense. So let's say, for example, Carla, let's say that you're in Spanish Fork, you live in Spanish Fork and you want to buy a second home up Spanish Fork Canyon, right? It might be in a different town, but it's not going to be 100 miles away. But if you're buying a cabin up there, that can make sense, right? And it doesn't necessarily have to be 100 miles away. So it can't, what they're trying to avoid is people, like, for instance, from California, a lot of times their kids are going to BYU and they'll want to buy a second home and let their kids live in it while they're going to school. But if you're going to be, renting it out, or if somebody's going to be living in it constantly, that's not what a second home is. And so now with the 5% down rule, though, right, they could buy a townhome, put their kid in it on the loan, and then put 5% down and buy it as a primary for their kid, right? So we've had some different things that have evolved because of that 5% down rule. Okay, another thing, the certain amount of days you have to live in it or use it 14 days out of the year to be a second home, okay? Now you can rent that second home out as an Airbnb, but you can't count any of those rents against it when you go to buy it, so you just have to qualify for that. So yeah, it has to be a second home, it can't be investment property, and there was a lot of people who were trying to buy as a second home, the rate's a little bit lower, only 10% down. And so we just had to watch that, if it makes sense. And if it really is a second home, right, then you can buy a second home, but we wanted to avoid people trying to buy investment properties and use the benefits of that second home. Okay, VA is 0 down. This is the one that I have people come to that said, my agent said it's a 0 down loan, so I don't have to put anything down. Why could that be a problem for your borrowers if you tell them that? Why would that stress them out? Why would that stress me out?
Because aren't there still gonna be a lot of associated closing costs?
Right, so they don't have a down payment with VA, right? Same with like USDA, but they do have closing costs, and so they are gonna have to come in with some money unless they get seller concessions. So just keep that in mind. It's a 0 down option, but there are closing costs. Good. Okay, there's also a VA mortgage insurance or guarantee fee. So with FHA, you have a guarantee fee or a mortgage insurance fee that comes along with FHA. And I typically, and I know this isn't correct technically, but I look at it as, okay, you have this, Shannon says, can the VA be wrapped into the loan? It always is. So that VA fee is always added to the loan amount. They don't have to bring that to closing. Good question. I like to look at that fee as, especially for FHA, as a buy down, because it's kind of what it is, right? You don't have to bring that money in, that's added to the loan amount. It's not technically a buy down because it's part of the mortgage insurance, but it feels like that because let's say you have a conventional loan, you're putting 3% down, your rate is 7%, and you have mortgage insurance, right? You go to buy an FHA loan, or you do an FHA loan, you have 3.5% down. You have mortgage insurance. It's always a little bit higher than conventional unless your rate, your credit score is lower. But then you get a 6% rate, but then you add this mortgage insurance fee to the loan amount. And so it's kind of a buy down that you don't have to bring in at closing, if that makes sense. So I like to think about it that way, just so people understand this. I'm going to add, $5,000 to $10,000 to your loan amount for you to go FHA, but you do get the lower rate. And sometimes it makes the most sense because if your credit score is under the 700, then you're going to have a lower payment and a much better rate with FHA. Okay, so just know that there's an extra fee on FHA and on VA, but they're added to the loan amount. You don't have to bring them to closing. With VA, you have two different fees for mortgage insurance, right? So they don't have mortgage insurance. FHA has mortgage insurance, but VA does not. If it's the first time they've used their VA loan, they're going to pay 2.3% of the purchase price, or excuse me, the loan amount. And so that's going to be added to their loan. If it's the second time, it'll be 3.6. So it's always a little bit more that second time. If they have disability above 10%, that fee is waived. And so I'll see that a lot with VAs. They'll have some disability and then we'll be able to waive that. Okay, Utah housing, 3.5% down. First home, it's a lot more documentation, but it has a lower rate. FHA VA has a little bit higher rate, but not quite as stringent documentation. And then the Freddie Mac follows the conventional. Why would you do a Utah housing conventional loan? Why would you do a Utah housing loan? Who knows about Utah housing? Excuse me. So Utah housing has a second mortgage and the closing costs and down payment are wrapped into that second mortgage. Thank you, Vahid. Help with the down payment. Sometimes people don't have a down payment right now, but they have good income and they can qualify for a loan. And the benefit of not waiting for their down payment is that house prices continue to increase. At some point, these rates are going to come down, and then I think we're going to see some increase in the house prices again, and seller concessions are going to completely go away. So the benefit is to get into a home now, refinance later, but you will have a second mortgage payment. Okay, I've done a lot of those. In fact, during 2020, I did a lot of them, and then they were able to refinance and they had, 10% down within a year, which is super awesome. So don't take down. If people have decent income, they might be able to still do a loan and do one of these zero down. DSCR loans, they usually require 20 to 25% down, like a normal investment property. The benefit with a DSCR loan on investment properties is they don't have to go over income. If it cash flows, then they will accept that and you don't have to give any income. Good question. Okay, remember for credit today, fill out the form. Let's go back and see if we can find that QR code, because I know people have just come in. There's a QR code if you want to scan it now, but I'll give it to you at the end too. Let's do our first word, Utah housing. Remember, you need to write down all 5 words. Send me 4. If you miss one, don't stress because you just need 4. First word today is Utah housing. Okay, we've gone over the down payments. We'll go over some mortgage insurance and things pretty soon, but let's talk about the different kinds of home types, right? As you're talking to your clients, you're going to be talking to them about, okay, are you planning to buy a new primary? Are you planning a second home? Are you planning investment property? Right now, I'll have people come in and they qualify for 350 to 400. They're probably most likely going to be looking at a condo or a townhome, something with a PUD possibly. So we want to know what makes a condo and what makes a townhome a townhome. Be brave. It's okay to be wrong. It doesn't matter. Let's start with condos. What makes a condo a condo?
I thought you didn't own any of the property,
Okay, good.
and a townhome you do. Obviously, there's shared communal property with both, but I thought with a townhome, you owned the property that your townhome was on.
Yeah, so townhomes are easier for lending purposes and just to know what kind of property it is than condos in a lot of ways. But I had an experience recently where a lady that I had pre-approved, she went under contract. The MLS said townhome. It looked like a townhome. It was an end unit on those row houses. It looked like a townhome. I immediately went, usually when I get a contract with a townhome, condo, anything like that, I'll go on the Utah state websites. And you can look up the property search, right, with the county. And this one said condo. So it said it could go cash or conventional on the MLS. And typically condos can go conventional. Most of the time, if you're going conventional, and she had 10% down, she was going conventional. And a lot of times with conventional, you won't have any problems with condos. But this particular condo unit ended up being under construction, which is a no-no when you're trying to get a loan on it. And it had one person owned more than 10% of the units. And there was a concentration of investment properties. So it wouldn't go conventional. And she ended up deciding to do seller financing, which I tried to talk her out of because I felt like it was super risky for her to put 10% of her money down, and most of that money was going to go to agent fees, right? 6% of that was going to go to pay the agents. And then if she got into trouble and needed to sell, it was going to be really hard to sell. Really, the only thing that she could sell would either be another seller finance or cash. So be careful when you're looking at listings for your clients. You could always call me and say, hey, is this really a townhome? It looks like a townhome. Is it really a townhome? And be careful when other agents are listing properties on the MLS, they can go conventional or cash, because this one couldn't go conventional, even though it said it, right? It really could only go cash. So the difference with townhomes are those row houses, right? Like Juliana said, you own the land underneath them. Condos, typically we think of them as like an apartment complex where you own the airspace around your unit. But condos really just depends on how they were done with the city. And so you'll have a condo that looks like a townhome. You can have a condo that looks like a single family home. And so be really careful with condos. They have to be FHA approved if you're going FHA. And so that's why a lot of times when you have condos like that, you have to look up the FHA on the FHA website to see if that condo project is FHA approved. And a lot of times you'll see condos that just say cash or conventional. Sherry's asked me, what is the site where you can look up what they are? So let's do that really quick. I think that's a good idea. Let me see if I can you guys see my, does it say Zoom? Okay. So if I go here and I go to Utah County, all the different counties have their own websites. But typically I'll search and just say Utah County property search or property lookup, okay? And then here's the county recorder's office. You can say real property address search. And then I can type in an address. So if I'll just type in my address. Okay, and then whatever the address is, so you can do this when you're going to list a house. I would always recommend going to these websites. Sometimes people, like the sellers, didn't know that this was a condo even, right? So sometimes we just don't even know. And then you can click on this and it will show up. So all this is I mean, none of this is private, right? You can see who owned this property before me. And so you can see the tax history. You can see the value, you can see the owner's names, you can see the location, you can see all the photos. So this still has my old photo because I tore down a house and redid it. Let's see what the appraisal information says. So see, this is the old house that I tore down, it's not updated. And so this wouldn't give you any information about my current house right now. But it will tell you it's a single family residence. It will say what, the year it was built, all those things. So I think that's a really good way to look up properties. And if I'm trying to remember what that condo was, I wish I could remember the address. But anyway, if you go in and I always see, you can see like where it is, but it doesn't really say up here. It says a subdivision, but I always go down here to this additional information and click on the appraisal. And then you can see, usually that will give you the best information of if it's a condo or not. So Salt Lake has their own too. Salt Lake County, slco.org/assessor. And same thing here. If you know the name, you can just type in the name. You can put the address and then you'll hit search and it will come up with all that information. Okay, so let me go back and click out of this. See if we can get back to where we were. Okay, so that's really good to know. Townhomes can go FHA without having to be approved. So that's another thing to know about FHA. And of course, single family residence. Now, what is the worry about FHA when we're talking about these different kinds of things? Why is it that when you're a seller's agent, you like to see a conventional pre-approval more than an FHA or a VA?
Appraiser required repairs.
Right, thank you, Lynn. Okay, so do you see those all the time? We're always scared of them, but typically, the last one I did that was FHA, they wanted the porch repainted and scraped because it had peeling paint, okay? So he's saying because of inspections. So inspections, I'm not worried as much about inspections as I am about appraisals. Maybe you meant appraisals, right? So the inspection, yeah, painting and hand railing, any kind of exposed thing. So anything that's super egregious is going to be called out by a conventional appraisal as well, right? And so keep that in mind. But FHA is a little bit harder, and you would know for sure that it's not going to go FHA if you're worried about it, but it might not go conventional either. If there's a hole in the roof, if the roof needs to be replaced, if there's wires hanging out, or if there's some safety issue, conventional appraisers are going to call those things out too. But we do worry about another thing with FHA appraisals. What's that? Let's say I have an FHA offer on my home, and we decide to go with that FHA offer, what happens with that appraisal on my property now?
It's filed on a website and it's, the appraisal can't be changed for another FHA loan. Used to be for
Correct.
6 months, but I think it's for 3 months now.
I think it's still 6 months. Last time I checked, it was still 6 months. So you have 6 months where that appraisal is the same. Now, right now, how fast are homes values increasing? We're around 5%, right? Kind of the normal. So they are increasing. So 6 months later, if you want to do another, if that loan falls through and 6 months later you want to do another FHA loan, you're going to be stuck with that appraisal. So that can be scary too. And it was super scary during 2020, right? When homes were appreciating in value so quickly that you basically, if you had something like that happen, you weren't going to be able to do an FHA loan again because you wouldn't be willing to lose all that money on that appraisal, right? So that was really scary for sellers agents back then too. Jennifer's asking, just had a jumbo conventional that had appraiser required repairs. Yeah, so you are going to see appraisers with conventional calling out things that really do need to be replaced. And it can be frustrating, right? Because those repairs need to be done before the loan can close and fund. Okay, so let's go back. Somebody said, where do you look up? I'm going to show you an example. Does somebody know a condo project, like an HOA condo project name that they could tell me? If not, we'll just look it up. But if you do, that can be helpful to be able to, when we're looking this up, but I can show you the website because that's good to know too. If I can get it to move over here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I usually just go FHA, condo, approval. And then you want to make sure you're in the HUD. You're on, because sometimes they'll be like Rocket Mortgage or somebody will have something, but you want to make sure you're on the HUD one. And you can look at, what makes an FHA condo, a condo FHA approved, right? And you can research that a little bit, but if you go here, that's not the right one. FHA condo, look up. So we go to condominiums and you'll see it. So this is the only problem I find with this website is if you don't have everything in here exactly, it'll say it's not FHA approved. And then you might put not FHA approved on your listing when it really is. So you have to be super careful that you look up all different ways that the HOA could be named, that the condo could be named, and so that you're not, because I've had that happen before where you put it in and you either put the, like it might be, I can't even think of any that I could give you an example of, but like if it has the before the condo name, sometimes if I take that out, it'll show up. So just be super careful when you're doing it that if it says it's not approved and you call the HOA maybe and say, hey, are you FHA approved? Call the HOA, whoever's in charge of the HOA and ask them, are you FHA approved? And do a little more research than just looking on here, because if things are typed in even just a little bit wrong, sometimes you'll get false information, and that can be bad if you have an FHA borrower that could have gone and done that property. So just be careful with that. You can always call me too if you're doing a listing, and I can help you look it up. And we can see if we can find it. If you can't find it, then you could say, hey, shoot me an email and say, hey, Eden, will you look up this property? Send me the link and the address, and I can look that up for you. I've done that before too. So that is really good to know, some of those places that you can go. Okay, let's go back to our. Let's see, I'm worried I'm gonna get out of it. Okay, let's talk about manufactured versus modular versus mobile. I get this question a lot. Which one is the most like stick built or a regular built home that you would, like a single family residence that you would buy? We call them stick built sometimes. So which one of the three is the most like stick built?
Modular.
Good job. Thank you, Lynn. Okay, Tamara got that too. Thank you. So modular is the most like stick built, and that will go, if you find a modular home, that will go just normally through the loans, just like a regular house would. They have to be on a foundation. So manufactured is gonna be just a little bit less, but after 1976, they had some laws that made them a little bit better. So you won't see anybody doing regular loans on a manufactured home before 1976, April 1976. So just know that 1976, if somebody comes to you with a modular home, or excuse me, a manufactured home built before 1976, they're not gonna be able to get a conventional loan on that. And I don't know anybody that will loan on those, so you're gonna be looking at a cash deal. Okay, so manufactured, they need to be on a permanent foundation. They need to come with land. So otherwise, they're basically like a mobile home. They may be manufactured and be built a little bit better than a mobile home, but they're still basically like a mobile home. They can be moved. Another rule is that it can't have been moved. So once that manufactured home's been placed on its foundation, it can't have been moved to be able to go FHA conventional, the normal Utah housing, right? So so just be aware of that when people come to you. They can't be a manufactured home in a mobile home park with an HOA. Usually if it has an HOA, then you know that it's that you can't go normal ways. There is a mobile home, you're not going to be able to go normal routes with any of the normal loan types. There is a 21st century, I think, or 21st mortgage, I think it's called. If you Google that they will do loans on mobile homes if you have somebody and you can send them to them. They usually require a little bit more down. They'll have to have 5 or 10% down. So just keep that in mind if you have somebody that wants to buy a mobile home. Okay. Mortgage insurance, we talked about this a little bit, but this is a good thing to know. Mortgage insurance drops off on a conventional loan at 20%. Austin, you unmuted. I didn't even give you a chance to be all brave and tell us. Go ahead.
Nope, I was gonna say 20%, but I have had mortgage people say at least like yeah, usually 22% they'll automatically, but you can request that it gets dropped off at 20. I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah, no, good. Thank you for being brave. Okay, so 20%, it is 22% that it automatically drops off. So you're gonna want to watch your mortgage insurance when you get close to that. If you refinance right, you can get rid of it if you have some appreciation in your home sometimes. And so when rates start to come down, we'll be looking at that for people who are refinancing. Do you have enough appreciation in your home? Does it appraise high enough that we can get rid of that mortgage insurance now? So that's a way to get rid of mortgage insurance. And the other way is to let it drop off itself, but like you're gonna have 2% they're gonna be paying mortgage insurance on when you don't need to if you don't call them and ask them to remove it at 20%, which I think is a little bit annoying because I feel like it should drop off at 20% by itself. So just kind of watch that. And then you can also ask for the mortgage insurance to be removed. So let's say that you have a really good rate on your house. There are a lot of people out there right now that have 2 and 3% rates, right? If their house is appreciated enough, excuse me, if their house is appreciated enough that they now have 20% equity, they can call their servicer and ask for that to be removed. And sometimes they'll require an appraisal to prove the value, but that can be a lot cheaper than a refinance. So keep that in mind. Okay, we talked about the VA funding fee, 2.3%. The first time they use it, the second time is 3.6 unless they're 10% disabled, and then they won't have that fee, which is nice because it can be a significant fee. VA doesn't have a loan limit anymore. It used to, but it doesn't anymore. So you can go up to $1 million on a VA loan, 0% down. So that funding fee can get pretty high sometimes. VA does not have mortgage insurance, so you won't see that, but it does have that guarantee fee. You can, when you're getting a conventional loan, put 20% down and avoid mortgage insurance. And you can buy it up front too. You have to look at like how much is that going to cost versus when am I going to refinance right now, especially where rates are high. Okay, any questions about mortgage insurance that you've always wondered?
FHA no longer allows mortgage insurance to come off, is that correct?
Correct. So it used to be a long time ago that mortgage insurance would drop off, but FHA, thank you for that. FHA does not drop off. Their mortgage insurance has come down significantly. I think it was the beginning of this year, maybe it was last year, went from 0.85, so 0.85% to 0.55%, which is a significant drop and makes mortgage insurance on FHA closer in comparison to conventional. And so there's been a couple times lately when I've had people who have credit scores in the upper 700s, 800s, and they've chosen to go FHA because they could put less money down and their mortgage insurance was about the same and their rate was lower and they were worried more about not having to put so much money down. So I always look at FHA versus conventional now just to see what makes the most sense for people. And sometimes depending on what their needs are, FHA does make better sense. It's also cheaper to buy down the rate on FHA I've seen lately, so it costs a lot less to buy the rate down than it does on conventional for some reason. So sometimes I'll just give those options to people. So yeah, you're gonna have mortgage insurance for the life of the loan. If you put 10% down on FHA, the mortgage insurance is 0.5 instead of 0.55. If you are doing a 15-year loan on FHA, the mortgage insurance drops significantly. So I did have a refinance that I did recently and they were doing a 15-year loan, did FHA to get the lower rate and their mortgage insurance was negligible. So, okay. We talked about this, 80% asked to be removed, 78% it must fall off. And we talked about, you have to typically have the loan for 2 years before they'll let you drop mortgage insurance, call and ask to drop it. So just kind of keep that in mind if you have a really low rate and you don't want to refinance. Seller concessions, what are the rules about seller concessions? Let's see. If you're doing a conventional loan, how much can your sellers give to your buyers in concessions? We're still seeing seller concessions on most deals. So they're still definitely out there. What percentage of the purchase price can sellers give on a conventional loan? 3 to 5% down. Austin, 3%, good. Yep, conventional loan, your sellers can give up to 3%. When is it only 2%? If your buyers are investment, they're buying a conventional investment property, sellers can only give 2%. So keep that in mind when you're sending in your offers. 2% on investment, 3% on conventional for seller concessions. If they put 10% down on a conventional loan, sellers can give 6%. So keep that in mind. If they're putting 10% or more down, sellers can give 6%. And for the government loans, 6% is the rule for concessions. So second homes too, they can give 3% down, 6% if they put 10 or more down. Investment properties 2 max. And it can only go towards closing costs and prepaids. So if people are paying off loans, which happens a lot, I'm going to pay off this car so that I can qualify, or I'm going to pay off this credit card so I can qualify. Those concessions can't go towards paying off debt or down payments. So keep that in mind. And then you as agents can give money towards the down payment on FHA to your family, but you can't on conventional. So you can help as agents towards closing costs on prepaids. And you can do it on your own loans, right? You can give your concessions towards your own property for closing costs of down payment or closing costs of prepaids. Okay, I wanted to just go over 2-1 buy down. I'm sure you guys have heard about those. I've done quite a few of these. And seller concessions can be used towards a 2-1 buy down. The only people that can give towards the 2-1 buy down are the sellers, the agent, and the loan officer. But buyers can't do a 2-1 buy down with their own money. So they can do permanent buy downs, but they can't do a 2-1 buy down with their own money. Okay, I'm being told I need to give another keyword. I always forget. So let's do 2-1 buy down for our second keyword. Okay, our second keyword is 2-1 buy down. So you should have 2. Okay, so this is just an example. If you have a $500,000 purchase price, your down payment's $25,000, they're putting 5% down. Their loan amount is 475. The initial rate is 7.5. This is a little bit old. We're down more in the high sixes today. But basically it depends on your down payment and the initial rate, because that's how much interest difference the sellers are going to be paying for, right? This money is going to sit in an escrow account with your lender, and you're going to pay the difference, this monthly payment on the first year, $624. So the thing that gets confusing for some of our borrowers when they do a 2-1 buy down is that it never shows their payment subtracting out the 2-1 buy down on any of their loan docs. And so they have one paper that they sign that's a 2-1 buy down, and it shows this savings. It doesn't show their payment ever, because their payment includes taxes and insurance, and the taxes can change, so that's going to could change. But it shows their monthly savings. And so that gets a little stressful for people if they aren't explained that well enough, because they won't see, wait a minute, my payment's supposed to be lower. And they just won't ever see that on their docs, because we're qualifying them based on this $3,321 payment, and they don't see that. So just keep that in mind when you're at the closing table with people on a 2-1 buy down. You'll see one document that they sign like this, but they won't. So that money just sits in an escrow account. You could write this down, 2.38% of the purchase price on a 5% down loan. And that's about what you're going to ask on a 2-1 buy down. And so that can give you a good idea when people are excited. So then basically, right there, if they locked in at 7.5, their first year they're paying as if they were locked in at 5.5. Second year is if they were locked in at 6.5, and then it goes back up. Idea being, hopefully you refinance before then. And if you do refinance, any money that's sitting in that escrow account comes off your principal on your loan, and it's not lost like a permanent buy down is. Okay, again, remember we need to give our QR code. Okay, so the 3-1 buy down, oh, there it is. Okay, there we go. So the 3-1 buy down is basically the same idea, but you have 3 years, so it's just more expensive. You're gonna have to ask for about 4.5% for a 3-1 buy down, but it's 3 years, and it's 3, 2, 1, right? 3 years, the 3 points, or 3 percentage points less the first year, 2 the second year, and 3, and then back to 1 that third year. So this, you can't even do a 3-2-1 buy down unless you're doing FHA, or unless it's conventional and they're putting at least 10% down, because you're going to be over that limit. Any questions on buy downs?
Yeah, I have one quick one. Oh, go
Please.
ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Does temporary buy downs, does that actually help people qualify for their properties, or is that just to ease the burden of the mortgage for those first few years?
It's just to ease the burden. They're going to be qualified on that thereafter payment at the bottom, and they have to qualify for that payment, or they can't do it. So it's basically you're qualifying for that big payment, but then the seller concessions help you ease into that payment, and hopefully you'll be refinancing. I really feel, because these go away without seller concessions. So in a market, that's the thing, like if you were in the 2020 market, right? If you've been an agent for very long, you'll notice they ebb and flow. You won't see these when in a seller's market, right? Because they won't be giving any concessions, so they go away. But yeah, they don't help you qualify, they just help you with your payment. Good question. Okay, we're gonna talk about a few more things with loans, and then we're gonna go on to the contract and talk about lending in the contract. So let me just make sure on my matrix. I usually use my matrix, and I didn't put it on this time. So maximum loan amounts, this is a good thing to talk about with loans, and this goes up every year. Right now in Utah and Salt Lake County, our max loan amount for a normal conforming non-jumbo is $766,550. So any loan amount over that is going to be a jumbo in those counties. Now other counties have higher ones. Summit's, Summit County's like over $1 million, right, for a 1-unit property. So we have to look at the county, and you can look them up online. You can just say, what's the conforming loan limit 2024 for whatever county. So just know they're a little bit different, but along the Wasatch Front, Utah and Salt Lake is $766,550. And then 2-unit, 3-unit, 4-unit, the conforming limit is higher too. Like a 4-unit properties, 1.4 million. That won't be jumbo, right? So those go up with that too. Let's talk just a little bit about credit scores. You're going to hear a lot about credit scores, and when you're talking to your clients, you know, a lot of the agents will ask them, you know, how's your credit? Do we need to worry about anything with your credit before they even get to me? And so I like, if they're going to try to buy in then 3 months or something, I like them to, you know, you want them to get with a loan officer, pull their credit, make sure there's no problems. But if they do have problems, I have a really good credit company, and you can reach out to me, a credit repair company, and she's helped me. If they do what she says, which is hard, some of these people who have credit issues have a hard time doing what she says. And I really like how she treats them, because she talks about nobody wants to have bad credit. Nobody wants to not make their payments. It's usually because of a life problem, divorce, medical bills, things like that, that people get into problems with credit. But she has been really good and helped people if they do what she says, and come back to me and to you so that they're ready to buy. So don't let credit problems stop you from working with people. I've had people working on credit for a year or more, and then they end up buying. So 760 or higher gets you the best rate in conventional. Every 20 points, they'll get better rates. So of course, always the higher the better. But yeah, like if you're down under the 600s, you're not gonna be able to get a loan. We're gonna need credit repair to work on that. So keep that in mind. And when you get it down into the low 6s, sometimes even with FHA, it's hard because they won't run. So I have one right now, 622, and it only runs with some reserves. So they had a little bit of money in their 401k with reserves. So you just have to be careful with the lower credit scores. Premium pricing, I don't know if you guys understand that, but I'll just go over that really quickly. That just means that I can raise the interest rate and lower the closing costs. So sometimes if people have less money to bring in, we can raise the interest rate as long as they qualify, and then we can lower the closing costs for them so that they don't have to come in with as much money. One thing with loans that I find that people have a lot of questions is about income. So if somebody's switching jobs, that doesn't mean they can't get a loan for 6 months. And I'll have people come to me and say, well, I'm switching my job, so I have to wait for 6 months. No, you just need to have 2 pay stubs if you're switching an hourly job or a salary job. But the biggest issue I find when people switch jobs is that they're not working the 40 hours. So let's say they start a new job on an hourly salary, it's not a big deal. You can switch a salary job, and I just need to see a pay stub or 2, and we're going to be fine. So that all day long salary is not a problem, especially when you're going salary to salary. But the hourly wages is the time when I find that we have the most problems, because let's say they start a new job and now they don't have paid vacation and they don't have paid holidays. Then their pay stubs are going to look variable to me, because they're going to miss a day for a holiday and they won't have work. So they just have to show, each pay stub shows 40 hours, no less, even, you know, 75 minutes or sorry, half an hour. I mean, like we've had that, it come down to that. So you just want to make sure that we're not variable, because if you switch a job and you're variable, then now we have to wait a year before we can use that income. So that's the biggest issue. We have a question about even if it's a different line of work. Yes, I'm not worried about a different line of work as long as you're on the job, you're full-time, and I see 2 pay stubs, especially even salary. Hourly too, you can switch, and I just want to see 2 pay stubs, full 40 hours. So yeah, good question. So Sonia had a question about the buy down. If the buy down is in addition to their closing costs, so they can't pay for it. So it is in addition to their closing costs, but the sellers would have to pay for that. So yeah, good question. It is on top of their closing costs. Okay. What about self-employed people? How do you determine their income? Good question. So self-employed, I'm not scared of self-employed, maybe because I have an accounting background and I can read taxes, but we just have their 2 years of tax returns. So any income that they have from self-employed, we get their 2 years of tax returns. Their Schedule C, we're going to add that after they deduct all their income. We have their net income at the bottom of the Schedule C. We add both years together and divide by 24. And that's the amount of income we can count. The problem is with self-employed people, you want to, well, with anybody, we want to pay as little taxes as we can, right? And so we're going to show all our deductions and everything on the Schedule C when we aren't trying to buy a house. When you are trying to buy a house, you want to make sure that you have enough income to purchase the home. And so sometimes people will have deducted too much on their taxes and will have to go do a bank statement loan to be able to qualify, and that's higher interest rate. So, you know, if they can plan ahead and they know they're gonna be buying a home, sometimes we can leave a little bit more income in there, or if we can look at their taxes before they file them. I have a lot of self-employed people that send me their taxes before they file them if they're gonna be looking to buy a house. So that I can say, yeah, you could qualify for this much with this income, and then they can decide how much taxes do they want to pay versus how much home do they want to purchase. Any other questions about self-employed income? So sometimes we'll have like only 1 year of taxes, and then we'll have to go bank statement loan too, if they want to buy right now. But yeah, don't be scared of self-employed borrowers. As long as they show income on their taxes, we can help them with a loan. Let's see if there's anything else that I forgot. Okay, good. What about, let's just go over the significant derogatories that you might find on credit, just so you kind of have that in your mind. If you have a Chapter 7 or a Chapter 13 bankruptcy in the last 7 years, we're going to want to know about that. And they always ask that question because you can't get another conventional loan if you've had a bankruptcy for 4 years or 7 years if there is a house involved. So the difference in the timing for a Chapter 7 bankruptcy is really just 4 or 7 years. 4 years if there's no home involved, and 7 years if there was a home involved. FHA is 2 or 3 years. 2 years if no home is involved, 3 years if there was a home involved. Same with VA, 3 years. Chapter 13 is a little bit different because Chapter 13 is where, Chapter 7 is where the debt's all wiped out, you don't have to pay it back. Chapter 13 is usually if you make more money and they put you on a payment plan to be able to pay the debt back. And so if you've made payments on that debt for 12 months and you're, I don't think it's really, maybe it's a lawyer who's in charge of your bankruptcy, signs off on that you can buy a house, then you could buy a house within a year after that. But typically don't see credit scores rebounded enough to do that. So it's kind of a unicorn, but it is technically possible. Okay, any questions about bankruptcies before we move on to the Rep C and talk about lending in the Rep C? Okay. Okay, we're already an hour through. Okay. So I'm gonna put for every hour that you teach, you can have 10-minute breaks. So I'm just gonna add those on at the end and we'll end at 11:40 if that's okay. Typically that's okay with everybody. Okay, we're gonna talk a little bit about the names on the Rep C, the address, lead-based paint disclosures, section 1.2. FHA addendum, I have a story about that. We just had a contract with that, and that was significant. Repair escrows, repair addendums, negotiating repairs, closing costs. We talked about the max closing costs. We talked about the max seller concessions, but we'll talk about there is a max closing costs as well. Signatures, addendums, sellers' names, earnest money, FHA bare wood. That's another appraisal issue that comes back with FHA. If there's any bare wood on the outside, I would think conventional would call it out too, if you really have bare wood on the outside of a house. Any issues with the home, Utah housing, we'll talk about that. Sometimes you can't go Utah housing depending on some of these houses, so you want to know that. HOAs, CCNRs, super important if your client is buying a house with an HOA. And FHA homes if the seller's purchased it within the last 90 days. So let's start with names on the Rep C. Now, typically we like the names to match the loans. And so sometimes, I don't know if you've had this happen where your lender says we need an addendum stating that the borrower's name is this or the seller's name is this. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But typically, if you get a pre-approval from me, I will have the names on the pre-approval as they are on the loan. So if you can match that, that's helpful. We don't care about middle names so much, but if we have, sometimes I'll have, like one time I had the client's name was Dustin, and he goes by Dusty, and on the Rep C it said Dusty. So then we had to get an addendum to fix his name on the Rep C. So just kind of know, but if you're working with me, the name on the loan will be on the pre-approval, but we want them to match. sometimes we remove or add people to loans, right? I had one where they didn't qualify because something had changed with their income. They added to add somebody as a co-signer. So then we're gonna get an addendum saying buyers to be and adding that person. Or sometimes somebody decides to fall off the loan and they don't want to be on it anymore, and so we'll take somebody off. So those are pretty normal things. And typically I'll wait till after due diligence so that we can just do one addendum for everything all at once. So you can be on the loan, and if you're on the loan, you're gonna be on title. You can not be on the loan and you can be on title and add it at the end. So like I have one right now where we're not putting the wife on the loan because her credit score is a little bit lower. We don't want to count her debt. She doesn't have any income. So we took her off, but then at title, we're going to create a document to add her onto title that the borrower will sign. And that's pretty normal. And then, like I said, we'll have addendums removing and adding people. Double check your address. You can go, we always use USPS versus the county website even. So you can just look up, there's a USPS lookup site. I'll show you, it's really easy. When you're, and even I actually wouldn't use, I would double check this when I'm writing an offer, just because sometimes I've had addresses be wrong on the MLS too. So you can just do USPS lookup, address lookup. And it's fine if it comes in that there's a problem, we'll just do an addendum too. It's not at the end of the world, but it's kind of good to know. It's super easy. So again, you put in whatever address you have. And then Lehigh, Utah. And I can skip the zip code and it'll give it to me. And this is what it says. So it'll give me that address, and I entered this, and this is the address that USPS uses. So then you can use it. So that's pretty easy. Okay, let's go back here. Okay, there we go. So we use that if go with UPS if the county addresses differ. And so yeah, that's pretty simple. Lead-based paint, anything built before 1978 will have to have a lead-based paint addendum. So if you know the house was built before that, you're making an offer, go ahead and send that lead-based disclosure with it to be signed with your offer. 1.2, this section lists items that are included with the purchase. I love it when agents put at no additional value. I'm not having my underwriters ask for a 1.2 addendum anymore, but it's always a possibility if they're worried about some big thing. And sometimes they'll ask for it if there's a shed included or some sort of bigger thing. Sometimes they'll ask for it. So I always just say anything in there, just at the very end of it, when you're submitting your offer, put at included at no additional value. I know it says that in the Rep C. And we've argued about it before when my underwriters have asked for it, but again, I'm not seeing it very often, but it's just a quick thing. Okay, so just make sure anything that is not included is also in the excluded items. Sometimes people get a little excited about stuff like that. Okay, FHA VA addendum. If you're going FHA and your client's going to be an FHA borrower or a VA borrower, you're going to include this with your offer. What about builders? Will builders sign this FHA VA addendum before the appraisal comes back? Has anybody had a builder sign the FHA VA addendum before? They usually kind of do their own thing, right? They kind of give you their Rep C, I get it, right? But I've never had them sign an FHA VA addendum before we get the appraisal back. Why? Austin, your best guess.
Oh, is it because they might not, the property might not appraise for the amount that people are looking for, so they don't know what kind of vehicle they're going to be able to use to purchase the home?
Yeah, so you're half right. It might not appraise. And what does the FHA addendum, VA addendum say? If you cancel because of a low appraisal, you get your earnest money back. So your earnest money is never hard as far as the appraised value is concerned, for the whole contract on an FHA VA if that addendum's signed. Okay, so you won't see them sign that until they know the appraised values come back, because then technically they'd have to give back money, and builders don't ever give back earnest money. Very rarely do builders give back earnest money. Okay, so I had one, actually we're closing today, and it was a VA loan. The appraisal came back, and what do they call it when a VA loan appraisal comes back for extra credit? What do they call a VA appraisal when it comes back low?
Tidewater.
Thank you, Lynn, Tidewater. So they'll send an email out that says we're invoking Tidewater, and that means that the appraisal is going to come back low. And this one came back $20,000 low. It's a little bit of a unique property, so you'll see that sometimes when they don't have good comparables, right? VA appraisers almost never change their appraisals. Very rarely. The seller's agent argued and sent his comparables, because he can talk to the appraiser all day long. I can't. And at the end, the appraiser just said, nope, 640, or sorry, yeah, 640. So the purchase price was 660. And the appraised value came back at 640 with 10,000 in concessions. So the seller's agent wouldn't sign the addendum to lower the purchase price. And he waited and waited. And we were working on a condition, and we wanted to have for sure approval that it was going to work. And so we waited until the F&A date. We actually didn't want to go past the F&A, but what if we would have gone past the F&A and we wanted to cancel because of the appraised value? Because they took away their concessions. They said, well, it's down to 640. We're just gonna, if you guys don't want to let the concessions go, we'll just go to somebody else. Shannon, EM is refundable. Yeah, so if they decided they didn't want to go, even if we passed our F&A, because they'd signed the VA addendum, their earnest money wasn't hard or wouldn't be lost, right? If they canceled because of the appraised value. Only because of the appraised value. If they canceled because of anything else, once you're past, then they won't. Okay, quick question. Are VA rates usually the same as conventional and FHA? They're the same as FHA. They're lower. They're usually very similar to FHA, so they're going to be lower. And good question. Let's see. It stays with the property for 6 months. That is the FHA appraisal. So Kara said, title prefers tax ID over address. Does lending not be the same? We always have to have the address. We do have the tax ID too, but we have to have the address correct as well to be able to do the loan. So that's why we say we use both. Can you add someone to the loan after a few years? This is a really good question. No. So my ex just got divorced again, right? So sorry, that doesn't really matter. But this person, right, got divorced again, and she was on his loan, and he has a really low rate, so he tried to get her off the loan without refinancing, which he was able to do. It's hard, but he was able to do it. But you can't add somebody onto your loan later unless you refinance. And almost always you can't take somebody off unless you refinance. So it's very rare that you'll be able to talk to your servicer and take somebody off the loan without refinancing. So you could add them on title, but not onto the loan. Good question. Okay, I think good. Any other questions about the FHA VA addendum? Super important when this agent was negotiating for my client, because you know, the sellers were saying, we're going to take your earnest money. And she's like, no, you know, you haven't signed that addendum to lower the purchase price. The earnest money isn't hard till the end of the contract. It doesn't go hard. So good to know. Okay. Repair escrows. Let's talk about repairs. So you have your due diligence, typically about 7 days, right? Sometimes longer, depending on if you're worried about things with the property, or if maybe you're going to do a renovation loan or something like that, and you want to make sure you have some bids. But one of the biggest things we see in lending is repairs on addendums. So if you want the seller to do any repairs before the contract closes and have the repairs done before you fund, then they need to be on an addendum, right? If they're gonna be done before then and you're not gonna ask for concessions or you're not gonna agree to concessions, yeah, put them on an addendum. I want this roof replaced before I'm willing to purchase this home. It's gonna go on an addendum, and then we're not gonna be able to fund the loan until that roof is replaced. If, however, you see repairs, maybe there's like one that I've seen on a repair addendum was going back and forth. So I don't know. Somebody unmute and tell me, how do you negotiate for repairs? You're through due diligence, your inspection's been complete, you have a few things that you want to talk to the seller about. How do you negotiate those? Meaning, do you send over an addendum? Do you call them? Do you email them? What do you do?
Usually send it in an addendum with a
Okay.
list of the repairs.
Okay, have you already talked to the seller's agent, or you just send a list of what you want done?
Both.
Okay, okay. So, good. And people are, keep it short in the addendum, call first, then send a repair addendum. I like the idea of calling and talking to them, right? All the things that you're gonna talk about, call and talk it over with them, get it in either an email or even a verbal, okay, yeah, this is gonna be accepted, this is what we're gonna do. Because if you send over an addendum, so for example, we had one where they sent an addendum over, trees to be cut back from the property. Oh my gosh, what is that gas? I can't think about it, that comes up out of the ground. Radon. Can't think of the word. So radon gas to be mitigated. The sellers then responded, right? They rejected the addendum, responded and said radon gas will not be fixed. Instead, sellers to give $1,800 in concessions. Does that work?
I would rather just have them say, we'll give you the credit for 1,800, not mention anything about what you're repairing.
Good. And why is that?
It's with an FHA, I think it causes problems.
In any loan, it's gonna cause problems. Anything on an addendum like that, now the underwriters see, oh, there's a radon problem. Okay, that radon's gonna be fixed. So in that was a real example, a real loan, and that radon had to be mitigated before we could fund that loan. So anything you put in an addendum, make sure that you know for sure it can be done before the end of the loan, or you don't want to see it in an addendum. What they should have done was talk about it beforehand. The seller is saying, we don't want to do that, we'll give you $1,800 in credit. Now the addendum is going to just read sellers to give $1,800 in concessions. We don't want to know why. We don't want it to say because of the radon, because now the radon is going to have to be fixed, right? We just want to say sellers to give this concession. So be careful with those escrows repairs. You can always call your lender, call me and just ask me, okay, if I want to do these repairs, what's the best way to put that so that it doesn't cause problems with the loan? Underwriters don't like money set aside for escrow repairs. So you're going to see, you want to talk about, if you're thinking about doing something like that, you want to talk about it. I have had underwriters allow roofs to be repaired and for the invoice to be paid at closing. But talk to your lender about that so that you don't cause any more problems with the repairs. The only time that you're going to see escrow repairs is like in the winter, if the roof needs to be replaced and it's under 2 feet of snow. There's some reason why they can't do it right now. Sometimes they'll allow escrow repairs for windows if they're really like when they were really backed up and it was 5 months before you could get new windows. They would allow them for things like that, but they're very rare now. So be careful about repair escrows. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Let's do our third word, repairs. Okay, we talked about negotiating repairs. I always like the idea of having a conversation, what's really going to happen, and then after you've decided it, put that on the addendum so that you don't cause any other problems. But for sure, I'm not saying just want to be clear, I'm not saying never put repairs on addendums, because there are times when those need to be done before you want to close on the house. And so only put repairs that are going to be done before you fund. And then what do you need? Anybody know what you need? If let's say it says seller to fix concrete in the driveway, or seller to fix some electrical thing, or whatever it says that they want done, it'll be, and then once it's done, what do we need?
Like a walkthrough list?
So you're gonna walk through and make sure it's done, good.
Receipts.
Say, so if you say it has to be done by a licensed contractor, you're gonna need receipts, good. But I'm gonna want an addendum, your lender's gonna ask you for addendum that says all repairs have been done to the buyer's satisfaction. Okay, so that's the thing that you're gonna have to, just make sure you have time to get that addendum done. You're gonna go make sure it's all done, and then send out an addendum. You can add prior to settlement if you want to, yeah. But either way, it's gonna have to be done before the loan funds. You can sign, right? So settlement, we always talk about closing. Settlement's when you sign and give your earnest money. And so you can sign the papers and still not have that addendum, but we won't be able to fund until you have that final addendum, all repairs done, and until everything's done. I'm guessing maybe I've had people sign that when it's not done, but I don't know, right? There's no way for me to know that. But yeah, you'd have to sign away that that's done to the buyer satisfaction. Did that answer your question, Shannon?
Yeah, I think it did. I mean, I just thought if you put prior to settlement on the addendum that you wouldn't have to then get another addendum that the repairs were done.
Oh, I see what you mean. I've always had to get the addendum that it's done. My underwriters have always wanted that.
Okay.
But that's a good question. I'm gonna ask about that because I haven't seen the prior to settlement on there. But I've always seen it, that I've always had to get that. So that's a good question. I guess I don't know for sure. But I would guess my underwriters would still require it. Okay. Closing costs. So there are some rules and regulations surrounding too much closing costs, right? And so there are some limit on government loans. Your closing costs can't be more than 6%. So buying down the rate right now, we have to be careful that we don't over buy down the rate, because it will get flagged as a too expensive loan. And so some of the ways we're getting around that when we have somebody who needs to buy down the rate significantly to qualify is if there's seller concessions that can kind of offset and help us with those limits. But just know that there are some maxes to seller concessions and buying down the rate when you're thinking about, well, we can just buy down the rate to qualify. Please make sure on your rep sheet that all pages are signed and initialed. I always look through that the very first thing when I get a contract, just to make sure we know no pages are missing. They're always going to ask. Sometimes we skip accidentally the numbering, and so we'll have to get an addendum that says that that was just missed and there is no addendum to, or whatever. So when you're changing terms, purchase price, closing costs, etc., just make sure the lender has all your addendums. Sometimes we'll have addendums that afterwards that I don't get because it doesn't change anything and I'm not worried, or I'll put it in the file afterwards and not have to go through underwriting again. But for the most part, anything that's in an addendum, we can't just get rid of it. And so you have to be careful what you put in an addendum. Sellers' names. I got a contract recently that just said owner of record. What's my underwriter gonna ask for? You just put owner of record as your seller's name. Yeah, Tamara says they're gonna ask for their name. So a lot of times, especially when the signatures aren't readable, sometimes on DocuSign and some of those, you can have a name that you can clearly read when the sellers are signing. But like the one I have, and sometimes they'll still ask for the names to be confirmed on an addendum anyway. So try to make sure you have the name. If you don't, submit your offer and we'll just get it later. It's no big deal. Corporation or LLC, we're gonna have to get the proof that they have the permission to sign. So that we had we had one time where the seller had gotten a person to sign on my gosh, my words are struggling. It wasn't a corporation, it was a trust. And they had the sellers sign it. Thank you, Karen. She knew what I was trying to do. They had a trust and the sellers had signed, right? He'd signed the agreement with the listing agent, all that stuff. And when it came down, right down to it, when we got the trust documents, he wasn't legally on the trust to sign it. So make sure if you have somebody where the seller is a trust or the property's in a trust name, that you know that the person who you're dealing with has the authority to sign. So we're gonna have to get that and prove that. We do that all the time with builders because they usually have a corporation or something like that. And so we'll have to get those documents. When somebody is buying a property and they want it to go into a trust, they're gonna buy it in their own name and then we'll put it in the trust name at title. So just know that a trust can't buy a property, and so you're gonna put the buyer's names in there. They will be on the loan and then they can put it into a trust. People talk about, you know, the servicer calling the note due if you change title into a trust, and so people worry about that a little bit. And I have had that happen one time and they just had to put it back in their name. So that can trigger that, but it's very rare. So just be aware. Earnest money. Let's talk a little bit about earnest money. Make sure your earnest money is deposited within the 4 days. So you technically have 4 days to get the earnest money from your client, and they're calendar days, not business days. So watch your weekends and stuff, but you have 4 calendar days to get the earnest money from your clients. And then you have 4 calendar days to deposit it. Please don't wait those 8 days. Lenders like to see the money go in the account quickly because we've got to document it and get record of it that it's left their account. So try to get the money into the bank and deposit it as soon as possible. Whose responsibility is it to make sure the earnest money gets deposited, the seller's or the buyer's agent?
Seller's agent.
Okay,
I wanna say both. You wanna make sure you have a receipt of the deposit if it's the buyers who's depositing it. If you're the seller's agent, you wanna just get a receipt of that as well.
yep. So technically both, right? Because both the seller and the buyer's agent need to make sure that the earnest money gets deposited. Now typically, right, the buyer's gonna give it to their buyer's agent, but you wanna let your seller's agent know that the earnest money was deposited on time and here's the receipt so that they know. What happens if the earnest money bounces? The check doesn't clear.
The contract becomes voidable.
Okay, good. Carla says bad deal. Dead deal. So not necessarily, right? But you want to let your seller's agent know immediately, and then they're gonna have to extend that deadline for them to do their earnest money. And they could cancel because the buyers are in breach of their contract. Okay, so just be careful of that. And I've had deals where the buyer's agent doesn't tell the seller's agent and then it gets a little messy, right? So just be super careful that you let everybody know. And sometimes there's just mistakes, right? Either money wasn't transferred in time. It doesn't always mean that they don't have the money. So just, you know, let the appropriate people know and get that extended for the earnest money. Okay. If you are depositing earnest money with a title company, make sure you have an addendum stating that. That's part of the deal. We had a guy, when we were doing our training for the mandatory, the long 3-hour mandatory residential class, there was a agent there who said he was a new agent and he deposited the earnest money with title and forgot to get the addendum. And at the end of the deal, it was back when, right, if you were a month away, your property might be worth 5,000 or 10,000 more in a month, right? So he forgot to do that. They were ready to move in, right? The buyers were ready to move in and the sellers canceled. And then they realized they didn't have that addendum. So they were in breach of contract. So technically the sellers could cancel, and they had a deal that was $20,000 more or something, another contract. And so they canceled. So super important to make sure that you have all the right addendums, and that's one of them if you want to deposit it with the title company. Julietta says, I had a recent deal where a home was purchased by a trust. He was a buyer from out of state. Did I misunderstand your comment, or is that Utah law? Yeah, so if he's buying it, he would have done his loan not in a trust. I don't know, maybe if he's buying in Utah, you can't be on the trust the loan can't be in the name of a trust.
He was a cash buyer.
No,
That's
So-
what happened. Sorry. Yeah.
No, that's
I
okay.
missed that connection.
Yeah, so he probably just on title, he was in a trust, yeah, and paid cash, sure. Okay, additional earnest money. If you want to add that, it never strikes out the old amount, so if you're changing anything with earnest money, make sure that you state earnest money to be or something like that in your addendum so that you make sure that that is added in. You want to be careful when you're writing your contracts because, and I'm sure you guys all know this, but we've had times where, you know, they go in order. So you have the original Rep C, then the addendum trumps that original at C, but unless you state something in the addendum, it stays the same. So let's say you gave 10,000 in closing costs. We had this actually happen. And the seller's agent responded, they didn't want to give the 10,000 in closing costs. They just wanted to lower the purchase price. But they didn't state that in the next addendum. It just said purchase price to be 620 instead of 630 or 640 or whatever. And so now hurry up and sign it for the borrowers, right? Because now they get the concessions and they get the lower purchase price both. So that was a huge mistake on the seller's agent's part. But make sure that you know, like so for example, on that VA loan, they had to bring us an addendum that said the purchase price to be, and we're not paying the concessions, both. Because had they not said that, just talk to us, right? They're still paying the concession. So you have to, anything that you don't specifically say is gonna hold true in the previous. Okay. Whenever you have in your hand client earnest money, check whatever state law and administrative rules require you to sign for receipt of the earnest money. So just make sure you sign for receipt, make sure you deposit it. I would not recommend accepting cash as earnest money. But you can, we just won't be able to use it for the loan. And that's fine. We have a lot of times where we can't source earnest money, and so we just back it out and they bring all the money at closing, then they get their earnest money back. So we've done that before where somebody has cash and we just say, okay, well, we're not gonna be able to use that, but that's what they have for their earnest money. So just make sure you document for yourselves what you have. Okay, FHA Bear Wood, be careful of that. Appraisal problems, we talked about that. FHA versus conventional appraisals, we talked about that. Any safety issues, both are gonna call out. Make sure the utilities are on for the appraisal, because then he'll have to go back out and cost about $150 every time he goes back out. Just make sure everything's on when he comes out. Make sure everything works. Oh, this is the one I wanted to talk about. So Utah Housing, just remember that if people want to do investment properties or if they're planning on moving, a lot of people, right, you know, have the idea of, okay, I'm gonna buy a house, I'm gonna live in it a year, then I'm gonna move out and keep that house and buy another one. Utah Housing doesn't work for that. They don't allow you to rent out a home that has a Utah Housing loan on it. And so be careful when you're talking to people, because if they don't have any money to put down, you might be like, okay, well, we could just do a Utah Housing loan. But before they can move out of it and rent it out, they're gonna have to refinance it. And so just be careful of that. They won't allow you to purchase a house that has a second kitchen. MLS cannot list renters that you can't have a second meter. So they don't allow any kind of rental properties, and they do go and check. So just be careful if your borrowers are thinking, well, I'll give a Utah Housing loan, then I'll move out in a year and rent it out. Make sure they know that they shouldn't do that, number one, and that they can get caught. So Utah Housing actually does just go knock on people's doors and check. Okay, HOA. FHA loan you can rent out. There's no problem. It's just Utah Housing. So you could keep a FHA loan and move out after a year and then rent it out. That's fine. One thing to consider though about FHA loans that is just kind of a tweak is if you're gonna buy another FHA, if you want to do another FHA loan, you can't use the rents to offset that current house if it's less than 100 miles away. And so we'd want to look at, okay, is it going to be fine to do a conventional loan, 5% down? Is your credit score high enough? So before you decided to buy another investment property. We feel with home purchase plus programming in Provo. I think it's similar to Utah Housing Loan. It's not a Utah Housing program. If I remember right, and I'm not positive, it's a grant program. And they do help with your down payment and closing costs, and we've done a few of those. But it's not a Utah housing loan, and I don't know if they can move out of it and rent it out. That is a good question that I don't know. Okay, let's talk about HOA fees. If somebody's purchasing a home with an HOA and you have a pre-approval, make sure you know if the pre-approval includes the HOA. Because for every $50 of HOA, it lowers your purchase price by about 10,000. It's a little bit less than that, but that's just a good, a good, I don't know why I'm struggling with words, but a good frame of reference for you to kind of keep in mind. So if you have a pre-approval letter at 405, no HOA, then if you have a $50 HOA on a property they're looking at, they now qualify for $390. Okay, so just keep that in mind. When I send out my pre-approvals, especially in the lower between 300 and 400, even up to 450, I'll usually say, this is without an HOA, make sure every $50 of HOA costs you $10,000. So typically if I'll just have them send me the link to the property and then I can put all the numbers in. Does this work with this $100 HOA? But for sure, it's gonna cost you money and purchase power. Be careful with transfer fees. Make sure you have your borrowers understand the transfer fees that are associated with HOAs. Some of them can be very expensive. And so you want to know if the sellers are paying those or if the buyer's paying those so they can come up with those extra fees. So if the seller has purchased a property in the last 90 days, it just can't go FHA for 90 days. So if somebody buys a house, fixes it up, they're not going to be able to have an FHA loan on it before the 90 days is up. So just keep that in mind. If you're flipping or if your sellers are selling a property, ask them, do you realize we can't accept an FHA offer within 90 days? So that you know, and after the 90 days you can, and it's not a problem, but it's a flipping rule. The number of days are calculated from the time the seller went on title to the Rep C signed. So not the closing date. So you don't have 30 days of extra time when you go under contract. It's when you go under contract, but that has to be 90 days after. Karen, thank you. HOA, be aware of any special assessments. I have had special assessments come up and those can be really expensive too. So make sure you know who's paying for those. I've seen them as high as $40,000. So make sure you know about those when you're talking about special assessments. Good comment, thank you. Conventional loans, you should be fine as long as the appraisal is solid. Seller may need to be prepared to prove how much they paid for the property and document the repairs. Okay, we have 3 keywords. Yes, let's do our 4th keyword. Let's do FHA. Easy one. Okay, we're getting close to the end here. Just have a couple more things I want to go over. And then if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them now too, if I haven't gone over something that you were hoping I would. Be careful of new construction. There's a lot of new construction out there. In fact, we as lenders have a hard time. Sorry, the 4th keyword was FHA. I didn't say it a couple times. FHA for the 4th keyword. We have a lot of new construction out there, and us as lenders, it's hard to compete with some of these preferred lenders that are out there, but I'm happy to always go over loan estimates, and I did that recently with one of my agents. Their buyer was going with the builder. I wasn't going to be able to match their 10,000 in concessions, but he just sent it over for me to look over and make sure there wasn't anything. He had 2 different lenders that had given him quotes. Which one do I go with? Please help me. So I'm happy to do that. Don't worry about that, and look over things for your clients. If you want to, you can just email me and copy them on it. Remember with new construction that you're going to need the final inspection from the appraiser. Your lender should be, if you're working with somebody who's communicative, they should be following up on that. But you'll have to have the COO and the appraiser will have to go back out and make sure everything's completed before you're going to be able to fund on that. Let's see, timing. Just give us a little more time on VA loans for the financing and appraisal. It takes a couple weeks for those to come back. I can do easy closes in 21 days on everything else. And if we go through underwriting beforehand, I can do 10-day 10 business day closes. So if you have somebody who's in a really competitive price range, have them come in and do a 10-day approval. They go through underwriting first. You can close in 10 business days and it's competing, you know, basically you can compete with cash. All we have to do is get the appraisal and the title docs. Condos, there's always a rate hit to condos, so keep that in mind when people are buying condos, they're gonna have to pay a higher rate for condos. I typically like, you know, just the normal due diligence, a week, financing appraisal, you know, a week before closing or something, but if we have a lot of the documents, we can adjust that, and that sometimes we'll get the deal if you have your financing appraisal deadline or closing, you know, earnest money going hard. So just talk with me when you're making your offer if you want to change those dates up at all. But yeah, protect your buyer by giving them enough time on the contract. So sometimes we'll have buyers who are a little bit more complicated, right? Or self-employed borrowers or things like that. So just kind of know your borrower, talk with your lender so that you give them enough timing and we don't have any problems. I always say rule of thumb, couple percentage points for closing costs and prepaids if you want an average. People will call me and tell me, can you tell me what my closing costs are? And I always just give them an estimate, a good estimate. Closing costs can be so fickle sometimes, and it depends on your property taxes, right? Then your closing costs are going to be a little bit more. It depends on what day of the month you close, a lot of things. So it'll definitely cost money to get a loan though. Okay. Let's go over we're almost done. Let me just go ahead and go over some of these questions. So please, Corey, please refresh my memory on things that trigger due on sale clause. Whenever you change title, it can trigger the due on sale clause. So people talk a lot about this due on sale clause when they're doing seller financing, if you're going to add somebody to title, or when you're changing from, if you're going to put your properties into your LLC. And you don't see it very often, but it's something that can happen. And like I said, the one that I heard of recently, they just told them, put it back in your name. So, just be careful of that, especially people get nervous about it with the seller financing, right? Because there are some deals where I want to be on title or I'm not going to do this. So just be a little bit careful and know that that's a risk. Is there anything else, Corey?
Well, are there circumstances and stuff where like just a homeowner decides to just start arbitrarily start renting their home out and stuff? Those other kind of situations?
Yeah,
I'm
so
not some of those details sometimes because of all the nuances and stuff. I work with investors and people that want to buy their house and then just go off and start renting it and go get a different loan or that type of situation.
yeah, so if you're getting a different loan, right, then whoever's on the loan will be on title, but that shouldn't be a problem. And when you start renting it out, that's not a problem. It's just when the title changes. So you should be able to rent your house out to whoever you want. It's only Utah housing. If you have a Utah housing loan, you can't rent it out. But other than that, I don't know of any other homes that you can't rent out. VA loan, Shannon has a good question about that. You would still have your VA, you couldn't rent it out and go get another VA loan, right? Because you've used your eligibility, but you can rent out any of the other loans. I don't know of any other problems that you're not gonna trigger a due on sale clause by changing your address. That's why sometimes with seller financing, people don't change their addresses because they're worried about that. But as far as like an investment property, if it's truly an investment property and you're not trying to hide it, like if you buy a 5% down property, say you're gonna live in it and then start renting it out and change your address, that could be a problem, right? That could trigger that because you're not doing what you said you were gonna do. But if you're following the rules, you live in it for a year and then you move out and you change your address so that your bills are coming to the new address, that's not gonna cause any problems. That's normal and okay.
I have a quick question.
Uh-huh.
So just going back to where you said, if you had an FHA loan and you decided to rent out your property and you were gonna, maybe rent for a few months or isn't it 6 months before you can get another, actually, I can't remember how that works, but yeah, you wanted to buy another property, another primary residence. Did you say you cannot use the 75% of the rental income towards the qualifying for the next loan if it's an FHA on the previous?
It's only if you're buying another FHA loan. So if you're trying, your new primary is going to be an FHA loan, then you can't even if the previous one is conventional, you can't use the rents to offset the one you're
Oh,
vacating. So it's only if your new loan is FHA that you can't use the rents unless it's 100 miles away. Even, it doesn't matter what the previous loan was.
okay. And what was the 6-month thing? I can't remember why I was thinking something about 6 months.
So that's with the appraisal. An FHA appraisal sticks to the property for 6 months. So if you have another FHA buyer and you have an FHA appraisal with one that's fallen through, then that value is going to stick with the property for 6 months. If you have another FHA buyer, if you have a conventional buyer come, they'll get their own appraisal. But if you have another FHA buyer, that appraisal will stick with it for 6 months.
Oh, no, I was thinking something more about turning your previous property into a rental if there was some sort of
Oh, so
time
that's,
period where
yeah, that's a year typically. But
to
you,
get the income to qualify, like you have to show, don't you have to show 6 months worth of rental income before you can use that to qualify towards the next home loan purchase?
oh, I see what you mean. So if you're vacating something, then you can just get a lease and offset. But if you have rental properties that you want to use the income on, they have to be on taxes. Unless,
Okay, so it used to be where you had to show 6 months worth of lease income, but now you can just show the actual lease itself and that qualifies,
only if you
right?
haven't owned it for at least a year. Because
Okay,
if you've owned, like, so we're talking about two different things. Like if you're vacating a property, you can get a lease for 12 months and get a schedule of rents from an appraiser that says that that's a good rental, like a normal enough rent. And then you can count 75% of it when you're vacating it. And then that same property, you can use it after it's been on taxes for a year. And you see that taxes, you can use the taxes as income if you have, if you're cash flowing, as income. But if you haven't owned the property enough to be on taxes, let's say you just buy an investment property and you bought it this year and you want to use the income to offset the payment so that you can buy something else, then you haven't owned it long enough, so you can use the lease. But if you've owned it for over a year and you should be able to file taxes, then we have to use taxes. We can't use the lease.
okay.
But that's just on the investment property, not the one you're vacating. So sorry, it's a little confusing because we're talking about two different things. But yeah, good question. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I've got clients who want to, rent out their primary and immediately turn around and buy another property for themselves. And I think we were told that would be fine and 75% of the income from renting it out would be used towards qualifying for the new house. But the lease alone, even though they haven't actually vacated the property, or if they would have to rent something out to live in, right? For the new lessees to come in, lessees to come in and begin paying rent, but you don't even need the first month's rent to show that it's actually, you just need the actual paper saying, on such and such date, this lease will begin and this income is what you're going to receive. And that's what you can use to qualify.
Yeah, so you can't, when you're vacating a property, you can't use income to qualify. You can just offset your payment to zero.
Oh, okay.
So you can't use income when you're vacating a property. It has to be like it's been, the only time you can use income is on these investment properties that have been rented out and are on taxes. But when you're vacating a property, you can just offset to zero. Even if you are getting more rent, right? You can just, let's say your payment's only 1,000 and you're getting 3,000 a month, you still can't use any of that income. It's just offsets that to zero when you're first vacating.
Which is great. That's probably pretty great. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. And we don't have to get the money in their account because, well, you can either get the lease agreement and first month's rent in their account, or you can just get the lease agreement and get a schedule of rents from an appraiser, which is what I do, because nobody wants to show first month's rent in their account. And the lease agreement has to start before the first day of their first payment. And so let's say you're vacating, right? You're going to purchase your new property July. Your new payment isn't going to be till October. So your lease just has to start before October. So it gives you time to move out, for them to move in, all that kind of stuff. So.
Okay, great. Love that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, we're at 11:45. So our fifth word is lease. we'll do lease. And, we have a couple more questions, so you're free to go if you have all your words, or you can stay while I answer the last couple questions. Oh, let's show the QR code again. Thank you. You're right. Let's go to the top, make sure it's the right one. Okay, so scan your QR code, put your words in, and then I'll just answer these last few questions while people are submitting their documents. Okay. Shannon, on that one about the VA loans, the owner, he could apply for a new VA loan, but he's most likely used all his eligibility. So if he applies for another one, if he has any eligibility left, even though he's renting out that house, he could use whatever he has left. But a lot of times people use all their eligibility. Spot FHA approvals, we are getting those sometimes, and basically that just means that the condo project is not approved by FHA, but we can get a spot approval on that specific unit. And so it takes a little bit of time, but we can just apply to FHA and do that. So talk to me about that if you have that concern and you're thinking about doing that, and we can look at that condo project and see if that might work for a spot approval. But we have had them in the last 6 months or so work, so it's not impossible. But we'd want to look at the documents with the HOA and stuff, because if they already own, if there's too much saturation of investment properties and stuff like that, we know it won't work. And so we just kind of want to look through that. Okay, let's see, Shannon. Let's see if I can go back here. QR code, okay, I did that. Are stated income loans conventional loans? So stated income loans have gone away. I don't know of anywhere you can get a stated income loan. So stated income loans were part of the problem back in 2008 and 9, where people could just walk in and say, I make this much money. And they're not conventional loans for sure, because they would be non-QM loans, which are outside of the realm of conventional. Conventional loans really are only sold to Fannie, Freddie, and Ginnie sometimes. And so there are specific loans that are sold in that arena. But yeah, stated income loans I don't think exist anymore. And so we do have bank statement loans that I talked about, and those are non-QM loans, so non-normal loans, right? Normal would be in conventional FHA. But stated income loans have gone away. Like a lady who just was at home, like stay-at-home mom, could go in and say, I make $500,000 and get a loan. So it was not a good thing. If a prospective client is wanting more information on programs to help first-time home buyers, is that something a loan officer would meet with the client to go over? Yes. Yep. So if they are trying to figure out what they qualify for, I have a spreadsheet where they don't have to fill out all the application, give me all their income documents for me to look at and give them an idea over the phone. Yeah, you qualify probably around with the information you told me. I usually ask them for their income and their debts, and then kind of what they're trying to do, right? Their credit score. And then I can just put it in the spreadsheet and we can talk about, okay, yeah, you're going to qualify around the 350. Is that going to work for you, right? Or you're going to qualify around 450. Yeah, let's do an application and get the exact numbers so that, we can talk about all the different things that might help them and the ways that they might get a loan without them just filling out an application, sending income docs, running credit. So we know that most likely this is going to work before we go through that hassle and expense. So yeah, have a call.
Follow up on that. Can I ask a quick follow up?
Of course, Amy.
So as a new agent, I don't have to be the expert on the housing programs. I can say, yeah, I've got the person, we can meet together, or I can send them a loan officer.
Exactly. And you'll find that that's what usually people do, right? So you as an agent are going to talk to them about, okay, how's your credit score? You could ask them, but some people don't like to talk about money at all with their clients, right? And some people just say, the very first thing you need to do if you want to buy a house is talk to a loan officer and figure out what you can do. And I think that's a really good way to do it, right? Because you don't want to be showing people houses We're talking to people about the house they want before they even know what they qualify for. Because sometimes if you only qualify for 300 and you're looking at 600 houses, it's very disconcerting and can be really hard on their willingness to even jump into the market. So yeah, a lot of people will either email, do a 3-way email with me, or they'll do a 3-way text, and put them on it, and then we'll schedule a time to talk on the phone or meet in person. Most people want to talk on the phone nowadays or do a Zoom call, but I'm happy to meet in person as well.
Thanks.
Yep, if you only have 4 words, that's totally fine. I gave 5 and you only have to add 4. Yes, you can get a copy of the recording. If you want a copy of the recording, please just email me so I don't forget. ejohnson@securityhomemortgage.com. And just say, can I have a copy of this recording, please? And then I'll have to upload it to YouTube, so it'll take a minute to get uploaded, and then I'll send the link out if you want to. Okay, can you go over the 3% concessions for the loans? Yes, so are you talking about the 3% that the sellers can give or the down payment? Sorry, concessions is sellers. So for conventional loans, Tamara, if I'm answering your question right, sellers can give 3% on a conventional loan unless you put 10% down or more, and then they can give 6%. On an investment property, sellers can only give 2%. So no matter how much they put down, sellers can only give 2% on investment property. And then on FHA and the government loans, it's 6% concessions. Okay, any other questions? You guys are free to go. Have a wonderful weekend. If you have any buyers that you need pre-approved, send them to me or James. James and I do our classes together, so sometimes you'll see me teach and sometimes you'll see him teach. We work together closely. When I'm out of town, he covers for me. When he's out of town, I cover for him. So we're here to help you guys, and let's make it a great day. Okay, see you guys later.